It's raining outside. It's beautiful. It's very nice rain. This happens. It's a spiritual thing. Rain like this. If you're someplace that hasn't gotten rain and hasn't gotten a lot of water, I apologize. I hope that you get rain very, very forthcomingly, very shortly. But I'm doing something unique today. Today's May 16th. 5 years ago, coming up on 5 years ago, in about a month and a half, I attempted to apply for a job online. They sent me a check. They told me to take the check, go open up a bank account, and cash it, get some supplies in order to do the job. And I took it down there and opened the account, and things happened. At some point, the bank said that because the check did not clear, that I was going to be banned from doing business with the bank, despite the fact that when I went and opened the account, I said, look, I don't really know if this is a good check or not. They said, don't worry, we have a way to take care of things like that. We so opened the account, deposited the check, checked on it, did what I needed to do. At some point in time, my understanding was that that check and the cancellation of that check was used in connection with a terrorist attack that happened in another country. Specifically, there was a report that there was a nightclub shooting in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Now, why Bangladesh? Well, it just so happened that the name of the company was that the company was presumably a company dealing with housing, private housing in Bangladesh. It was supposed to be a private real estate company dealing with housing in Bangladesh. But there happened to be an NGO that was at least in part sponsored by the World Bank that had a similar name that worked with housing issues but from a nonprofit perspective. And so as I started trying to work with the company that presumably was hiring me, I started wondering if it was some sort of shadow account, some sort of shell account. And so when the attack in Dhaka happened, I was very alarmed. I had actually contacted the NGO after the situation with the private company had occurred because they were hiring somebody to do emergency preparedness and prevention, and I had had a history in that. And I sent them some information regarding what they were hiring for while these things were pending. The bank that I opened the account at was Bank of America, and the situation I had with that was something in and of itself. What I saw was and learned was that attempt for me to deposit that check and open that account up, the check ended up bouncing, ended up being connected to a string of crime that ended up happening that I believe and understand is directly attributable to that original effort to open the account. Now, if I open a check and the check bounces, that's one thing. But to carte blanche say, you're banned from doing any business with this bank. And by the way, we've charged you an extra $12 risk penalty. And even if you pay it, you're never going to be able to do business with this bank again. But don't worry, nobody will know about it. It won't show up on your credit report. The only people who are going to know about it are the people who work in the finance sector. So the people on the back end have some sort of record somewhere that has a different kind of credit report on us than we are allowed to know about. And apparently some of us, like me, had a $12 risk penalty. Now, I anticipate other people had different dollar amounts. There were different risk metrics that were ascribed to other people. But there were at least 3 major terrorist attacks that happened within a 1-month period that were in direct correlation with that original effort to make a deposit. My understanding is that between the time of the terrorist attack in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and the time when at least 5 members of the Dallas Police Department were killed by somebody characterized as one of those lone wolf shooters, former military veteran, who takes the high ground, starts picking off cops, that in between that time, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank shut down a number of websites that were alleged to be involved with somebody identified as a militant that was identified as some sort of security threat. At the time, for up to a year and a half after that terrorist attack in Dhaka, there was publicly accessible information in the media that said there were 12 accounts, 12 websites. I believe 10 of them were directly connected to, 10 or 11 of them were directly connected to an individual and the organization associated with that of individual, including the political party. And then one was another one that wasn't directly connected, but was judged to be a security threat on par with or akin to what was going on with the other ones. And the Palestinian Authority just shut them down one night, just took them offline, shut them down. I think there's more to the story than that. I think that when the terrorist attack in Dhaka got called, that somebody understood those websites in some way, shape, or form, including through back-end coding that was put on their websites by entities that were surveilling them, was actually responsible for generating the crypto commerce that was financing that terrorist attack in Dhaka. And part of what happened was when they shut those sites down and when the attack in Dhaka happened, something got tripped in the SAT tech associated with the kind of financing that was able to pull off that hit in Dhaka. And it ended up interfering with satellite technology associated with the items necessary to calibrate and effectuate the disengagement of what allowed for that shooter in downtown Dallas to pick off those cops. See, there was a sentience about the technology that was surveilling that site and that was capable of engaging in a manner that would have been able to disrupt the bandwidth going on in that area that was allowing for what was actually financing the actual literal currency that was running in the course of that attack. But something was not connecting the nodes that were necessary to engage with what it was needed to shut down what it was that was financing the capacity for that attack to maintain and continue. And so the police were not able to respond in a manner that actually took out the shooter. Now, nobody wanted to talk about this for nearly 5 years. There was pressure put on the former chief of police in Dallas. But before there was a verdict rendered in that regard, somebody had already started hedging on a Detroit import to Dallas. I didn't know what that was, right? Until I got to Houston. And then there was a report that the senator of Texas and somebody else had helped participate in a large-scale operation to shut down something called Backpage. What's Backpage? Well, Backpage was an internet platform. It was a website that was doing all kinds of illicit finance connected to solicitation of sex. So, in order to finance the announcement of the new chief of police in Dallas, who's from Detroit, they used the shutting down of a website involved with illicit sexual finance in order to make the announcement that she's going to take over as chief of police. Those facts are not unrelated. And it begs the question of, did the same people that allowed for that correlation to occur have a material interest, if not premeditation, in engaging in the series of transactions that allowed for the attack in Dhaka, Bangladesh, that allowed for the shutting down of those 12 websites in the West Bank just in time to provide a diversion in connection with Dhaka, and then allowed for the assassination of 5 police officers here in Dallas? I contend there is. And I contend that going on nearly 5 years of refusing to respond at the most basic level is evidence that there is, in fact, a very serious and comprehensive conspiracy in this regard. Now, all of this has been going on during this COVID-19 situation. I've already reported, and we're going to be getting to this coming up. Last year, I watched how Citigroup ended up laundering tons and tons of money that was being illicitly and illegally captured here in the United States with the consolidation of assets that were being impacted by the alleged COVID-19 pandemic. and laundering it through their Asian banking system. Within a very specific and strategic period of time, there was a Citigroup conference in Asia. And among the things that happened was there was an announcement that was put onto into the public in the United States about how there had been a huge increase in market activity in the overnight futures market from Asia. But what they did not report, and you had to find on your own if you knew how to look, is the very night there was that huge transfer on the futures market from Asia was the night that Citigroup's subsidiary that provided temporary life insurance policies in Singapore had the termination of its short-term life insurance policies specific to COVID-19. Short-term life insurance policies were available for a very short period of time. If I'm not incorrect, it was 2 to 3 months. The day after the period on those short-term life insurance policies expired, all of a sudden there's a huge transfer and a huge sell-off on the futures market from Asia. Now, I do not know if there were other smaller companies in other parts of the world, up to and including the United States, that offered temporary life insurance policies as part of COVID-19, but I do know that those expired insurance policies provide for further economic activity associated with the futures market. But what kind of activity? At the time in Singapore, there was a very significant reporting of clustering of COVID-19 cases at dormitories for people in school. Not all of these people were university age, by the way. That the predominant trend apparent in Singapore at that time involved clusters of COVID-19 cases at the school level, at the dormitories of educational facilities in Singapore. How many students in Singapore did somebody take out temporary life insurance policies on and decide that they were going to sell on the futures market as soon as those policies came due? I contend there was a substantial amount, and that Congress knew all about it. Congress knew all about that and all about other activities comparable to that, and that's why they spent that 1 month last year tabling the bill on student loan forgiveness in the United States, while Citigroup was involved with a conference in the Asian markets that was laundering tons and tons of money and assets from the United States and other places. Now, what ended up happening 3 months after that? What ended up happening in October and November of last year? Well, in October and November of last year, there was the convergence of a major 6-month period based upon certain implementations of policies in the United States, up to and including what was the initial COVID-19 relief. It was as if certain banks had signed up to take a sort of serialization in issuance of stock specifically connected to the forced centralization of all of the private property and all of the assets of the people of the United States that had been falsely collapsed into alleged emergency assistance and call-up because of COVID-19, and then after laundering all the toxic assets for their corporate clients through what they had access to because of COVID-19, they issued stock. And some of that stock was horribly, horribly, horribly toxic. I contend that some of the stock that Citigroup issued in October and November of last year is getting flipped right now through Bank of America. On the website for Bank of America, there was supporting evidence. I have several articles that were published a little over a few weeks ago that say that right now, beginning on May 1st and going through June 1st, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 dividend payouts connected to stock issues for Bank of America. This is exactly the timeline. This would be the second major stock issue, right on the appropriate timeline, and right in connection with the recapitulation of the same pattern of racketeering, the same pattern of criminal activity on a global scale, including connected to acts of terrorism and including connected to allegations of complicity with financing terrorism since 2016, since the presidential campaign season of 2016. To this day, Bank of America hasn't responded to me. The SEC hasn't responded to me. The MSRB hasn't responded to me. Congress hasn't responded to me. The FDIC hasn't responded to me. And just yesterday, what was yesterday? Well, yesterday was the period by which one had to acknowledge and had to be on the record as a shareholder in order to be availed of the dividend payouts which are coming up. Tomorrow is going to be the first dividend payout based upon those who were signed up by May 1st. What has transpired between May 1st and now? What are we dealing with right now when it comes to the situation regarding the elements I just spoke about concerning Bank of America specifically 5 years ago? I'm sorry, they didn't just shut down the websites. Apparently, Israel knocked out 2 media centers, but is saying that's not what happened, right? It's Hamas's fault. Whose fault was it that Bank of America accounts that were financing acts of terrorism were not shut down for almost 5 years? 5 years that they had proof. 5 years they had a transcript record. 5 years they had the original check. 5 years that they had all the transactional records they needed for while that account was open and credited with the full amount of that check. 5 years that they've had all the information about what was bundled on in the clearinghouse and allowed to clear instead of that check. 5 years coming up, they didn't do anything, and now we're dealing with this? That was just 3 incidents within a 1 month period in 2016. They have compounded. They have been replicated over and over and over again. And the most nefarious aspect of it is how it connects to not only Bank of America, but Bank of America and Citigroup and Wells Fargo and their issuances of municipal bonds, including under completely fraudulent pretenses. Let me tell you something. How many of you either engaged in municipal purchase issues starting with the time frame during which COVID-19 had been announced, or have had some manner, way, shape, or form of engaging with a municipality within the United States, including through the budgeting process or through any sort of ordinance or policy change within a municipality in the United States since the beginning of the formal announcements about COVID-19 that had a municipal bond issued. Did you see the prospectuses where they added on an additional page? They inserted something later that said, well, because COVID-19 came up, we can't exactly guarantee all the terms in here. So we might have to make adjustments. From the onset, it was intentionally set up to engage in a massive, massive cover-up. Those one-page additions to those bond prospectuses do not give anybody carte blanche right to go back and try to fabricate a history that did not actually occur, so you can cover up for what did. Right now, there's information on the media. Right now, the media is saying that there is an alarming situation regarding the diagnoses of children and babies in Brazil with COVID-19. We are coming up on what would have been the 1 month period after such information started coming out about Italy. But where is the information now about the diagnoses, including the deaths of children and babies in Italy from COVID-19? We're into the second stock issue of this COVID-19 specific to the United States. We don't have any information about those Italian children, and now they want to characterize it as Brazilian. Why? Why? Why was it allowed to start in Italy, go through India, now they're trying to make it Brazilian just in time for tomorrow's dividend payment, right? Now let me ask you, would you consider this to be terrorism? Would you consider strategically hedging on stock issues
based upon a paradigm where you force collectivize your own people, misrepresent what the initial investment capital was, so that when your second stock issue comes and you flip it, it has a completely different demographic experience indicator. It's in a completely different hemisphere. And by the way, there are completely different market conditions in the country of concern, aren't there? There's also completely different legal proceedings ongoing at the time of these stock issues in the countries of concern, isn't there? Including in the country where the primary issuances are going to occur or intercept through, which is the United States of America. We have not had one indictment. We have not had one impeachment. You took away Senator Burr's cell phone. You let Representative Loeffler make a mutual fund after she got busted. Now BlackRock's got mutual funds with the People's Republic of China. What is Congress doing with our stock? Every single member of Congress, every single senator needs to be thoroughly, comprehensively exposed. If they've purchased, sold, or traded any stock through any of the major banks, but specifically through Citigroup or Bank of America, since the public announcements about COVID-19, they need to be impeached. They willingly aided and abetted the forced collectivization, the enslavement of their own people. For what end? Did they intentionally conspire in 2008 to cover up for what September 11th was actually about, so that they could do exactly what they're doing now? I contend that's exactly what's going on. That they absolutely 100% intentionally orchestrated September 11th so that they could provide the material foundations for what happened during the 2008 banking bailout, use the Affordable Care Act to either torture us or try to bribe us, and now they're trying to sell us off like we're chattel. We do not fucking belong to them. I did not participate willingly in announcing my stake in any Bank of America issues on May 1st because there was a conflict of interest with a Citigroup bond for $850 million in Chicago, strategically coordinated to aid and abet acts of nuclear terrorism and traffic people from Honduras. But their dividend payments come tomorrow. What are you intending to pay out tomorrow, Bank of America? What are your shareholders intending to pay? What are your members of your executive board intending to pay? What are these so-called regulators or officials with the Federal Reserve or the Department of Treasury anticipating they're going to get as their stake in what Bank of America's already done and apparently intending to do tomorrow? I contend it's absolutely 100% terrorism. It's absolutely 100% treason.